Welcome. So I am excited to introduce to you my friend and sister in Christ, Dr. Davia J. Crutchfield. She's a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, and she received her bachelor's degree in psychology from The Ohio State University. I know we're in Michigan territory. And then she received her master's and doctoral degrees from Howard University in communication and media studies. Yes, HU? Thank you. Somebody knows. And she also earned certificates in the areas of women's studies, international studies, entrepreneurship, and ecumenism. And so this talk today, what's the name of the book? Here we go. Her talk today, Faith, Intersectionality, and Black Masculinity, Kendrick Lamar'S Urban Theology, is actually a portion of her dissertation project, which is currently under review. So we're excited. So Dr. Crutchfield describes herself as a woman who lives to love, to learn, and to share the gifts of both, and her description of herself is apt. For example, I met her while we were both graduate students at Howard University, and 2 years into our friendship, we were at Chipotle getting some food. And once we get our food, we sit down, and like 2 minutes later, she gets up and walks off. And I was like, where is she going? Y'all messing with the lights. I said, where is she going? Because y'all know Chipotle food is not good cold. And so I looked up, and she'd actually walked up to a man who was shabbily dressed, unshaven, dirty, and by the looks of the way people were avoiding him, smelly. And so in short, he was a man who was impoverished. And instead of dismissing him like everybody else did, she walked right up to him, looked him in the eye, and she said, "Excuse me, sir, are you hungry? Would you like something to eat?" He answered with a yes, and she extended her arm and guided him toward the ordering station. And then he said, "Well, what can I have?" And she said, "You order whatever you want." He did so, she paid, he thanked her, he left. And she sat down and didn't say anything else about it. Now, this encounter that I had witnessed, has stuck with me, clearly, because I'm bringing it up now. But she allowed this man to exercise agency and to order with dignity. She did what I would later come to classify as embracing, a model that Reverend Dr. Denise Kingdon Greer embraces, as opposed to outreach. Now, to be clear, so Dr. Crutchfield's actions that day forced me to look differently and more deeply at myself and my Christian walk. How could I call myself a follower of Christ and so easily refuse to see and therefore refuse to embrace the least of these? Now, I share this encounter because when she told me that she was going to do her research on Kendrick Lamar, I wasn't surprised. Because Kendrick Lamar takes up this very question in his song, How Much a Dollar Cost? What does it mean for us to ignore those who are right in front of us? How much indeed does a dollar cost? In asking this man what he wanted by allowing him to exercise agency and to order him, and by treating him with dignity, Dr. Crutchfield was loving, not through words, but in deed. But her actions don't stop there. She lives out her desire to live to learn. Her various certificates testify to that, but beyond that, the ripple effect of her living to learn is clear. I'm a witness. You see, she inspired me to get my certificate in women's studies. And so I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for her. So, ultimately, she aims to share the gifts of both loving and learning. And today, she is here to share those gifts through her research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Crutchfield.
First and foremost, I have to thank you all for welcoming me to your community, to your university, to your school. I am Dr. Davia Crutchfield, and welcome to what I hope will be an inspiring, at the very least intriguing, conversation on the intersectionality of Black masculinity, Christianity, and secular rap music through the compelling and sometimes controversial lyrics of Kendrick Lamar. Before I begin, I must also thank the Cultural Affairs Committee, the Global Learning Director, the Women's and Gender Studies Program, the Emmaus Scholars Program, for sponsoring the events this week and for their gracious hospitality. I would also like to thank each of you, Hope's illustrious faculty, students, staff, and Howland community for your warm reception. Thank you. I must also thank my incredible personal community of family and friends who not only supported my endeavors, but have challenged me to stand strong in my voice and my perspective. Namely, I must salute and recognize Dr. Kendra Parker for all that she is and all that she does. Hope College, you are truly blessed to be able to count her amongst your own. Dr. Parker, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Now that all the mushy sentiments have been expressed, let's have some fun. So why Black masculinity? Why Christianity? Why Kendrick Lamar? Why now? Well, I'll begin with a brief story. My brother, Malcolm Xavier, yes, I have a brother named Malcolm X. My brother and I were on the Amtrak returning to Washington, D.C. after our brief visit home. And if you've ever had the luxury of a train ride anywhere, you know there is ample time for a conversation. And so during maybe hour 9-ish of this ride, we sparked a conversation about Jesus, during which Malcolm still had his headphones kind of cocked on, and I could hear that he had some rap music playing in the background. That image stayed with me throughout my time in academia, especially as I continued researching Black masculinity and the intersections of Black masculine identity. Furthermore, it stirred my own memories about both the normalization and the conviction for someone such as myself whom adheres to secular rap music as part of my own socialization, expression, and healing. It was normalized at home as our parents enjoyed a variety of mainly Black cultural music expressions. At any point in time, my mother will have a Tupac song playing, and then right afterwards you'll hear Donnie McClurkin. My dad, you will hear him blasting Donny Hathaway, and then right afterwards a Fred Hammond song. So there wasn't this stark contrast as to what was appropriate or inappropriate with music in our household. Outside of our home, however, it was criticized and even sometimes condemned in certain social spaces as this secular music and Christian spiritual music adoption was viewed as a practice of lukewarm Christianity. This staunch separation was so problematic for me because from my own personal experiences, I knew there was a purposefulness of what we deem as secular music that provided healthy, resourceful, and even positive spiritual components that if I were to haphazardly demonize them, I would suffer personal and cultural deficits. So initially, I wanted to interview Black Christian men who attended various churches around Washington, D.C. to examine their relationship to their faith in secular rap music. What I observed with my brother was not an anomaly. I spent ample time at Howard University School of Divinity and witnessed some reiterations of what I perceived with Malcolm with some of my colleagues. But as my work interests developed, the study budded into a textual analysis about God talk and secular rap music. In 2012, Kendrick Lamar dropped Good Kid, Mad City, and mainstream audience went crazy. One interesting caveat was that researchers, musical journalists, Christian artists, etc., didn't quite know what to do with Kendrick Lamar's music. Audiences received overtly cautious political rap messages. We've also received overt God talk and Christian language in somewhat testimonial or confessional manners. We received messages about gang violence, sex, lust, drugs, and more. At the time of my study, investigations of secular, conscious political rap and God talk was underexplored. So I used an interdisciplinary theoretical framework to analyze themes of Black masculinity and Christianity to present how this body of secular conscious rap music serves as a space for Black liberation theology, and how this artist, through his art, became the voice of an urban theologian. In order to understand how this fits together, I needed to answer two fundamental questions in order to even see if this urban theological phenomenon existed in this context. First, how does Kendrick Lamar's lyrics present Black masculinity through these albums? How also, in order to analyze this question, how is it that Jackson and Dangerfield's Black masculine identity model provided a blueprint for identifying intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality in the construction of Black male identity? So the way in which I have distributed all of this 200 pages of information, some quick bullet points. So first I'm going to go over some key terms, identify exactly what the Black masculine identity model is, what I termed the God experience and what all that constitutes, Black liberation theology, what an urban theologian is, go through my method as well as the results. So Black masculine identity model via Jackson and Dangerfield was comprised of 5 tenets. Recognition, the manner in which people presented themselves to and behaved around various groups. Independence, the spaces where self-expression and autonomous behaviors occurred. Space not only in a tangible location, but as one's disposition and mentality. Achievement, the accomplishment of both personal and collective goals. Personal gains were equated to materialistic and transcendent gains, while collective goals reflected the gains of the cultural community. community itself, which was both global and local, whether he's talking about the world at large or personal neighborhoods, and struggle, which, as you can see, is in the center of this mandala as the result of the quest for balance between these other tenets. These researchers argued that Black men shared a unique concern about their identities and attributed the formation of Black male identification as a cultural property. Also, Jackson and Dangerfield conceived that a Black man's self-efficacy, which is his individual control, and historical symbiosis, which is his attachment to historical experiences, impact the spaces in which his masculinities or these masculinities were enacted. Now we can move on to the God experience. Next, I assessed what I termed the God experience. This was the interaction or communion with God through secular rap lyrics. It is conceptualized from readings on sacred and secular Black music, as well as Utley's explications of the following. We have God up there and God down here, which is phrased by Utley, and these descriptions are used to describe the relational experiences with God. So whether it is up close and personal, if you feel the interactions of God within your presence, or if God feels so distant and so far away as hovering far above in an unreachable capacity. We also have commodified Jesus, which are the depictions of Jesus Christ corresponding with capital gains and prosperity goals. You may see this enacted with Jesus pieces and crosses. Crucified Jesus, the depictions of Jesus Christ's crucifixion as synonymously with rappers' own struggles. Companion Jesus, the depiction of Jesus Christ as a companion on a gangster's plight of survival and mobility. Oscillation, that's one's connection to Black churches or church experiences, enacted through whether or not you attend, your grandmother attends, and that's your relationship to the church. You know, there's one in your community, but no one in your household necessarily attends it. And then sacred or the sacredness. And this phrasing is used in relation to specifically religious or identifiably religious categories. This includes words or expressions relative to religious intent, doctrine or laws, or reverencing God. I examined these themes through theomusicology, defined by Spencer as the theologically informed study of music. It provided an interdisciplinary design which offered me an avenue to explore God's symbols in Kendrick Lamar's secular music. Black liberation theology. These combined results of the Black masculine identity model and the God experience was viewed collectively to see if the tenets of Black liberation theology was actually present in his music. But what is Black liberation theology? As supported by Cone, Pen and Pen, it is an arm of Christian theological discourse and analysis. This arm presupposes that the core of Christian theology is liberation, and its philosophy regards God's revelation of this liberation as expressed through the acts, works, and mission of Jesus Christ. In other words, it conveys that God's mission is liberation for the oppressed and marginalized, and it includes 6 key principles. We have the Black experience. That's the collective ancestral experience of captured West African people deposited within the continental U.S. during the transatlantic slave trade. We have Black history, which is the history and events in the history of African Americans. Black culture, ethnic identity. Scripture, the liberating elements of Scripture, such as the passage of Exodus 14. Revelation, liberation expressed through the acts of Jesus Christ. And tradition, which includes oral history and customs and rituals. Who or what is an urban theologian? So as Hodge referenced Tupac Shakur as an urban theologian, because his contextualized spiritual authority was embedded in profane and sacred musical spaces. Although Tupac was a secular rap artist, Hodge regarded Tupac's music as touched by God with a special message, seeing life and culture beyond the routine of the ordinary. That is a direct quote. Similarly, this researcher suggests Kendrick Lamar's music is relative of that exact same influence. So the method. I took 9 of his albums between 2003 and 2016, which included YNIC, Training Day, C4, his self-entitled EP, Overly Dedicated, Section .80, Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, which is one of my favorites, and Untitled and Mastered. And I took the lyrics from those 9 albums and looked at this 146 song data sample. I did not exclude songs that included other artists. I just pretty much did not evaluate their contributions to the song. Every single one of the songs in which he actually performed a verse, I took that as his actual writing of it, so that was one of my assumptions that I made and was a limitation to the study as well. So the analysis was solely based on Kendrick Lamar's lyrical content. Only the transcripts from these songs were analyzed. There was a time period where there were quite a few mixtapes and some songs that were released once they became really popular. I did not include those in the study. It was kind of difficult to try to situate exactly if it was a Top Dog Entertainment released mixtape, if it was something that he may have dropped and somebody else had picked it up and mastered. So it was just a little too hard to kind of put those into an appropriate space to utilize for the study. So the study was qualitative, and I based its findings on my interpretations of his lyrics. Each track was textually analyzed, and I cataloged the findings thematically, which permitted me the ability to describe and interpret the data content as individual bars, stanzas, and thematic groupings. I used the thematic analysis to investigate the major themes of Black masculine identity model, the God experience, and I was able to assess my additional sub-themes discovered within the findings as well. I observed each Black masculine identity model tenet in my data sample. Recognition appeared in a total of 57 songs, which constituted about 39% of the sample. A total of those 59 songs were linked to recognition, as Kendrick Lamar expressed it by authenticating himself as a talented and professional rapper, not someone who raps as a pastime or played around with the craft, and emphasized his influence through his role as a respected leader. Independence was seen in 71 songs. Though the topic overlapped with recognition, such as with his intergenerational relationships, it differed as Independence focused on his growth in identity and his maturation. Examples included how he affirmed himself and the transformations in his self-expression, the changes in his relationship expectations. One such text was in his interview with DJ Dave. I believe that was included on track 16 of his 2005 album. So DJ Dave asked, "What influenced you to become a rapper?" He said, "The typical person would say, other rappers. I'll be straight up honest. When I found out I was dope." Next question. Furthermore, his work identified two continuous and pertinent truths about himself. One, he's a thinker. And two, he's a born leader. Those certainties guided his declarations towards autonomy, having internal peace, and staying true to himself. Achievement was represented the least of the Black masculine identity themes. It was presented in 44 songs, or about 30% of the sample, individually and collectively in relation to material wealth and social mobility. The most observed themes were community and struggle. There was a fluctuation in community, local and worldwide. Usually worldwide themes often included a lot of intercultural conversations about not just Black people as a group of minorities, but also different ethnic minorities who were also experiencing types of different social and political oppressions. The theme of struggle grew throughout his albums as he spoke to the privileges of maleness, but the disadvantages of Blackness. Results on the God experience. God up there, God down here was seen in roughly 23 songs. He expressed these themes at times portraying an imperfect relationship to God. His expressions of the God up there, were not always favorable. His lyrics also displayed moments in which he viewed God as present yet unattainable, notably through hype metaphors and distressed confessions. His imminent feelings of death plagued his inner peace and were tied to discussions about God. Commodified Jesus. His lyrics occasionally associated God's closeness with external symbols. Colloquially regarded as the come-up, Kendrick Lamar shared that God's favor is evidenced in a believer's life through attainable wealth. His lyrics on materialism and Christianity continued as metaphorical discussions on capital gains and prosperity gospels, and he even critiqued pastors' contrived tactics of provoking emotional responses from congregants. I'm having a hard time with these P's and Q's today. From emotional responses from congregants in exchange for their funds. Companion Jesus was seen in only 3% of songs, most heavily in his 2015 release of To Pimp a Butterfly. His lyrics speak of an encounter with a homeless man and how much $1 costs. which also presents companion Jesus contrarily to what Utley previously defined. Utley's definition personalized the actualization of Jesus Christ on earth. In Kendrick Lamar's example, this encounter tested his heart and his faith. Crucified Jesus is even 5 songs. His lyrics reflecting crucified Jesus vary, and how much a dollar costs also. He exhibited resentment toward this homeless man by questioning his assumed responsibility for even asking him for money in the first place. Like, why am I responsible for saving you? In other songs, he refers to himself as society's Messiah and Compton's human sacrifice. His lyrics not only depict him as the messenger or representative of the high power movement, but also depict him as the responsible party for his generation's mental and emotional health. His lyrics suggest that his lyrical craft is a form of ministry. Therefore, he considers his devotion to his work as reminiscent of Christ's sacrificial love. It's an obligation. It's his duty. It's his mission. Sacredness was most viewed in the God Experience theme with a total of 102 songs. And at least 50% of songs on every album included topics of sin and condemnation, faith and forgiveness, or metaphorical God language. So in order to assess the tenets of Black liberation theology, I looked at the themes and the sub-themes of both Black masculine identity, Black masculine identity, there we go, and the God experience. The concepts of Black liberation theology were more involved and required this assessment in order to find the tenets available. And as you can see, each one of the tenets were actually present in his sample body, as well as several sub-themes of communal empowerment, effects of enslavement, Black male leadership, generational wealth, capitalism, and the American penal system. Kendrick Lamar's comparisons of enslavement and incarceration reemerge in these evaluations as the continuations of the injustices practiced and imposed from the transatlantic slave trade. He articulated these concepts through his own narrative as he used his personal history to critique issues impacting Black cultural identities. Furthermore, Kendrick Lamar attested to the liberating work of Jesus Christ, which he experienced through Christ's sacrifice and subsequent salvation of mankind. Therefore, Kendrick Lamar's musical and lyrical range provided a gateway for contemporary examinations of Black liberation theology. Similar to Cone's blurring of secular and spiritual spaces, Kendrick's lyrics connected struggles for social and cultural advancements to moral discussions of good and evil. His blend of the 12 dominant Black masculine identity and God experience themes showed how prominently connected socio-political and racial oppressions, normalized street cultures were all involved in religious and spiritual constructs. Furthermore, his music provided an opportunity to explore secular rap as a conduit for Black liberation theology. His lyrics on faith amidst social oppressions, such as economic depravity, racial tensions, street culture, created an opportunity for further explorations of Black Christianity, especially since mainstream language referencing Jesus Christ often articulated him as peaceful, gentle, and patient. This interpretation of his lyrics' explications of God, Jesus, and the devil displayed God's intimate relationships with the Black community. It additionally placed God in support of the Black community through Kendrick's deliberate expressions of Black history and cultural and spiritual awareness. Kendrick's use of sacrality and secularity display what Hayes attributed to a characteristic of liberation theology. Kendrick's lyric expressed a new way of exerting one's theology by performing one's faith in the world. His lyrics and embodied performances are sacred acts which position him as a liberating voice in the same manner of a pastor, a prophet, or a messenger. Therefore, Kendrick authorizes himself to share and shape the interactive relationships between humankind and God. Hip-hop expanded from a culture to an institution which historically provided a platform for developing Black men's agency. Examining rap music further showed it as a space to investigate the complexities of Black masculine identity development. Kendrick Lamar explicitly referred to rap as a liberator, as its leniency as an artistic expression abled negotiations of lived realities and religious occupations. This study revealed through Kendrick Lamar's music that rap still provided young black men a vehicle to design and define their own identities. Though various secular rap genres, particularly gangster rap, have been used to add to the criminalization of black male imaging in the media, they have also been used as signifiers of black male strength. Kendrick Lamar's ability to absorb gangster and conscious personas, presenting the spiritually conscious gangster, allowed him to attack the constant terrorizing of black male strength and development by addressing intercultural and intracultural offenses, challenges, and issues. Secular rap continued as a form of black resistance and quest for black cultural autonomy. This examination of secular rap showed that as a cultural influencer, its platform for socially displaced black youth to reiterate and retaliate against social oppressions included religious appropriations of language. The language used within secular rap music addresses the challenges black men face according to their genuinely lived experiences. This research asserts that secular rap was not devoid of observances of God and godliness. Therefore, one should not confuse the use of profanity with being profane or godless. Kendrick Lamar's interweaving of both sacred and secular to probe and expose social and personal issues demonstrates how the secular, especially music, can be an effective tool of spiritual awakening. It also shows how it produces spiritual affirmation, regardless of one's social or religious context. The study extends Hodge's 2013 appropriation of what an urban theologian was through the examination of his music beyond this contextualized spiritual authority. This study asserts that an urban theologian has the ability to convey, display, or provide testimonials regardless of his or her spiritual life in a manner that is understood by or relative to individuals who may not be heavily involved in religious environments. This person often has an unconventional background whose relationship with a supreme being or spiritual journey includes social, economic, and racial oppressions. There are notions of street theology, the public theologian, urban theology, and other forms of practical and constructive theologies in religious studies. However, by regarding Kendrick Lamar as an urban theologian, this research extended ideas of what classifies one as a theologian or a minister, and what constitutes ministering or even one's ministry. It also extends the sacred spaces from which this embodied experience takes place, as Kendrick Lamar's work and performances transcends the boundaries of traditional sacred spaces. Furthermore, it establishes that one does not have to absorb traditional or churched appearances or behaviors in order to provide a positive spiritual impact. I must state also, this study does not assume a factual representation of Kendrick Lamar's personal beliefs or lyrical intention. That's my allegedly side. Allegedly. So this research presents. The analysis and interpretation of his music does, however, debunk assumptions of what faith and ministry, as articulated by anyone who asserts alliances with a particular religion or belief in a supreme being. His work and embodied proclamation of faith debunks what ministry should look like and how it is called and how one is called by God to minister to the church or the unchurched. Through challenging traditional perspectives of Black Christianity, Kendrick Lamar's lyrics presented an alternative pulpit for not only the alternative believer, but also those who align themselves with non-traditional and traditional church settings. He showed that even a political gangster could express his Christian faith through secular rap, thoroughly blending sacredness and secularity, and in the process provide a powerful ministry to the disenfranchised. His lyrics and interviews regarding his life and work demonstrated that one's relationship with God is not devoid of situational challenges. For some, there's no separation of the hustle and the hustle. The journey does not support a double occupancy of already established spaces, but rather a complete erasure of boundary lines. Kendrick Lamar showed that the gangster has a purpose too, and just as he is gangster, so is God. Thank you. So we're going to do Q&A. Kendrick, passing the mic.
Yeah, we're gonna do Q&A. I don't know about passing the mic anymore, but we can try. So I do have a mic, but if I can't get the mic to you, just speak up and project. And if you would, say your name, so Dr. Crutchfield knows who she's talking to. So, got a first question? Feel free. free.
Hi, I'm Alex.
Hi, Alex.
Hello. So I was wondering, when you were looking at specifically the aspects of Black history and community, did you look at, for example, on *Pimp a Butterfly* and *Untitled Chapter*, he used a lot of aspects of jazz, which can tie into Black history, and also various sampling that he used of previous Black artists such as Tupac and things like that. Did you incorporate that into your study?
It was not part of the evaluation as far as my data sample went, but it definitely was referenced when I did my historical analysis, my historical background. I definitely did tie it to and pull through other Black cultural expressions, because rap is not the first genre of music to blend sacrality and secularity. So I wanted to be sure to make that constant continuation connection, and that rap music still is showing that these tenets of both the sacred and the secular exist.
I'm just gonna stay seated. I'm Luke.
I Luke.
So just a quick question is that, did you think that his use of like gospel choruses in the background tended to be an association to religion, and like how deep do you think that went?
It's easy to say yes. As far as my data sample went, I just strictly looked at the portions that were attributed to him. So if there was another artist that may have contributed to the chorus of a song, and that may have really been a strong portion of religious music, it was not included in the data sample. But the fact that it exists on the album gives some suggestion that clearly there is a relationship. Yes, yeah, I'm sorry.
Did you have a follow-up?
No.
Hi. I'm wondering if you think, this is kind of a big question, but I'm wondering if you think there's anything that traditional religious institutions can learn from this approach, and or do you think there's like something specifically powerful about this approach because it's separate from religious institutions?
I do think that it displays something very profound for traditional religious spaces. One, it makes one consider their own biases. I think it's really easy to become tied to a tradition or something and attribute it to being automatically the appropriate or the only way in which to display or believe or enact one's faith. So I do think to have that open engagement, that opening awareness, not only would strengthen the relationship between religious leaders and the congregations, but also really create a good, what's the word I'm looking for? Transparent relation and interaction, especially with younger people within the church setting. And what was your second question? I'm sorry.
Like, is there something particularly powerful about this approach because it is distinct from religious institutions? Like something that might be lost if it was kind of more within the institution.
I don't think it would be lost if it was within the institution. I think to incorporate it is necessary. As the world expands, as we as people expand, we realize that the four walls of the church did not constitute the church, like we are the church. And so as we step outside of those spaces, I think if we can continuously have that funnel of not just within a traditional church setting, having that engagement and interaction, but also allowing youth to have this constant engagement and interaction. Because just because I don't have the traditional theological training, it does not mean I am devoid of having a spiritual moment with another person and releasing a message that God has given me to release. So if we constantly have that on the street, person-to-person engagement, as well as the traditional, I think it would create a stronger faith community. Can I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Dr. Crutchfield. I'm Matt Jansen. I direct the Emmaus Scholars Program. I really like the idea of thinking of Kendrick as a Black liberation theologian and trying that trope out. Particularly, I think it's suggestive. So in the late 60s, early 70s, James Cone was looking at the secular movement, the Black Power movement, as the site where he saw God active in history in the United States. And that was also framed as a pretty strong critique of what he saw as the white church and large swaths of the Black church largely failing to be tracking with what God was doing.
Yes, sir.
So I think that's really suggestive to think of this, what we might think of as secular rap, perhaps being an avenue for theological discourse. My question, though, then, if we're going to think about that parallel, one of the strongest critiques of early Black liberation theology was that it did not include the experience of Black women. And so I wonder, does Kendrick's liberation include Black women?
It is so interesting because Kendra and I actually had this conversation yesterday.
Okay.
Because it was also tied to a question one of my committee members asked at my dissertation. How would you bring in the voices? Because if you look through the body of data I have, there's so much conversation about his interaction with women. Some of it is the highlighting and the reverencing of women, and some of it is some very heavy misogynistic and sexist language. And so we even discussed bringing forth a Black feminist lens into part of the evaluation to create that avenue to include specifically the voices and the contributions of Black women. Kendrick Lamar was not created in a vacuum, and he was not created in a vacuum that did not involve women in his community, his mother, women that he engaged with and interacted with, his female audiences. So to provide that Black feminist lens, I think that would really strengthen the research data and show how it is that this form of liberation is inclusive as opposed to divisive. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. You go first.
I was just wondering, so I think I probably started listening to Kendrick when Section 80 dropped in 2011, and I remember throughout my whole time of listening to him, I felt like a lot of these things were implicit, and then when Dan dropped, I was like, whoa, like, this is so explicit. So, like, doing years and years of this research, and then he drops that album, like, did you feel like it was, like, the summit of your research? Yes, like, it's confirmed,
I felt like I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
So it's easy to go, okay, this is my interpretation. What I think exists, I'm seeing this here, but the fact that he released Damn right before I defended my dissertation. One, I was like, I'm not including it in the data sample, but I would talk about it in the discussion. But the fact that he then dropped that, which not only supported a lot of what I said, but even contradicted even the way in which he may have expressed himself. What was that one very blatant line, like, don't call me Black? Like, just the way in which he will define himself within his faith. We're actually working on an article that incorporates that album as well as the Black Panther soundtrack, since he did a lot of work on that soundtrack, just to see the ways in which he has strengthened what I assumed, not what I assumed, what I showed was evident in the previous study, but also those contrasts and differences. Like I said, there were themes that were a continuation from start to finish, but then there were some that kind of died off. Others were strengthened, so as he becomes, I believe, more affirmed in himself and who he believes himself to be, there will be that continuation of some very prevalent themes that continue on, and there may be some that just completely, not necessarily discredit, but show a distancing of what once was evident that is no longer evident in this place in the stage of life. Sorry, was there a question back here? I don't want to leave you out, sorry.
My name's Remy. I'm
Hi,
a
Remy.
senior here. I was curious on the inclusion of women in this, like this theology, this urban theology. Like a Black feminist lens, wouldn't like Black feminism have a completely different or just like a varied identity model to go off of that would create like a program for them that would make it feel more, I guess what I'm wondering about is the identity and the inclusion for liberation. In your personal opinion, which platform do you think Black feminism can find spiritual expression in if it's not the masculine identity of urban theology?
Well, one portion of it is the study specifically looked at Black masculinity as a component to Black liberation theology. It's not to say that that's the absolute in order to see tenets of Black liberation theology. I think a Black feminist lens would strengthen that conversation by bringing in those other perspectives. What Kendrick Lamar has done within his work is not an anomaly. You know, there have been artists, female artists, black female artists, that continue this conversation of blending the sacred and the secular to tell their own stories as well. So I think expanding the data sample, the fact that this exists on this level with this particular artist, showcase that there is the strength and the possibility that this exists in other spaces with other artists as well. So I don't want to make it seem like only Kendrick Lamar's music provides the tenets of Black liberation theology. This is an expression of how Kendrick Lamar's music showcases the tenets of Black liberation theology. So it's not to remove women from the conversation or to say, like with Matt's question, that there was no correlation or no relationship. But I think just to bring that theoretical lens to the conversation would definitely show more of an inclusion. Hi, Doctor.
Hi. Terrific theoretical underpinning, I think, in showing the rigor of qualitative research itself that's often under criticism.
Yes, ma'am.
You do a very good job with that.
Thank you.
Send my props up. The second thing is, has your research, do you have any indication that your research has actually reached Kendrick Lamar? Now that it's very
I was gonna say maybe. There's been some behind the scene conversations, and it was like, well, send me this piece. Okay, now send me this piece. Like, do you want my document? You know, but I wasn't quite sure, the strength of the relationship with the person I conversed with at that moment. But I have friends that like to tag Kendrick Lamar into my things. So I would not be surprised, let's say, if one day he finds out that this dissertation is body of work. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Hello.
So in Hodge's reading about his thoughts about the theology of hip hop, he talked about how like the profane and strong language of using in your songs was like to voice like the frustrations that they feel about society and like the injustice. And he connects that to like language that music also uses.
The first thing that comes to mind is you hypocrites. And how it was so taken aback for Jesus to refer to anybody as a hypocrite. That's how audiences received Jesus' use of such overtly aggressive language, Because now I feel like we use the term hypocrite very loosely. And at one point in time, it did not have such a loose translation. To call Jesus profane, no, not profane, to say that Jesus used profanity would not be my sentiment. But I would say that it is not a new phenomenon to use maybe not so polite language to express the frustrations of what you're experiencing. I'm a person that believes that even expletives have a place, they have a specific purpose in a conversation and in a sentence. And so especially when you're dealing with social oppression, when you're dealing with racial injustice, when you're dealing with tumultuous emotional experiences, the last thing you want to do is fight for an appropriate word to use to express yourself. So in that moment, I am one of those advocates that say, drop the bomb so you can get through the moment. If you're already going through a struggle of what you're experiencing, the last thing you need to do is curb your language to satisfy the listener. So sometimes you need to just drop the bomb to get through the moment and then heal. Yes?
So my question is sort of a follow-up to that, and how there's sort of two parts of this sort of like inappropriate nature of secular rap music. One being the profanity, and the other being perhaps exploitation or even glorification of sort of actions that the general public might find distasteful, to put it lightly. And so how does a sort of like Black liberation theologian perspective justify or sort of understand this expression and glorification of things like gang violence, revenge, drug use, etc.?
You don't justify it. It exists. And I think that is the important note to mention, that it's not about taking all of these moments and situations and experiences and putting them neatly into a package. It's showing how amidst all of these situations, all of these experiences, all of the nasty, all of the good, that this strong body of the thing, this Black liberation theology, exists here, even with all of the good and all of this really nasty stuff. And it's not about trying to take all of this and package it in a pretty manner. Thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Jubilee.
Hello, beautiful name.
Thanks. So for the past couple of years, I've been looking at Black history as almost a continuation of Hebrew history in the Bible, because in Deuteronomy chapter 28, the Lord cursed the Hebrews and told them that they would go to a strange land that is not theirs, and that they will be oppressed for 400 years in that land, where they will be sent by ships and poverty and things like that. And so I wanted to know your critique on the third song of Damn, that's called Yah, when Kendrick says, I'm an Israelite, don't call me black no more. That name is just a color. It ain't black no more. My cousin Carl did worse than no my word. Okay. If you're right, we say that we all been cursed. I know he walks the earth. That's my question. What's your critique?
The question is, what's my critique?
Yeah, just like the Bible way.
First of all, I love that you flow, and it made me really happy.
I do color too.
I feel this. I feel this. Secondly, I would have to say, I'm not surprised. As I said, as he affirms himself continually, I think we're going to see a lot of things that may starkly contrast what I saw previously in those first 9 albums. So that wasn't a surprise to me. It was, but it wasn't, because I'm like, okay, Kendrick, this is the direction we're going in, you know. But thankfully, it was not part of my sample at the time when the study was done. However, it is part of the conversation for the next study that I'm currently doing with my former advisor that incorporates the Damn album, as well as the Black Panther soundtracks, the songs that he was heavily on the Black Panther soundtrack. But my critique, I don't critique it yet. You know, I just experience it because he's not just a subject to me, I'm also a fan of his music. So I love to see the progression in which he is going in. I always believe in that whole define yourself for yourself, so who am I to critique where you are? You know?
Yeah.
You know? Yes, sir.
So, my name is Taylor, and I wanted to know, like, what was your, like, first impressions of Humble when you dropped it? Like, just your first impressions of Humble when you dropped the video. Like, the first impressions of it, like.
Brilliant, because it's Kendrick, and I'm going to stand because it's Kendrick. I thought it was brilliant. And as different as it was, because to me it was crazy different, as different as it was, there was so much to me that still resonated from what I saw in the research. I love the fact that it was so heavily based on like real communal images. Like, it was like a blatant visual expression of what he was talking about lyrically. You know what I mean? It was like this big amalgamation of all of these things that we've been discussing. So to me, I was ecstatic. So I didn't criticize it or look too deeply for things that may deviate from what I discussed in the research, or just see really what exactly was that pinpoint moment that connected this theme to that one. I was just taken aback by it in awe, really. Yes, sir.
I'm Dr. Crutchfield, neuroscientist. I'm really impacted by your Black masculine identity theory in terms of what's said in the middle was struggle. And I'm thinking of chronic stress, like every day, your formation of your identity circles around the idea that you know you're going to have to struggle. How do you think that's represented in the text, as well as those implications of, if you think about executive motor function, executive decision making, memory loss, allostatic load, right, depression, anxiety, you know, so all these.
Look who's flowing now.
The neuroscientist is flowing. That this impacts, you know, and how does maybe grapple with that of being a Black man? We talk about, you know, balancing that privilege with that also extraordinary kind of, we're going to yank this assumed privilege away from you every single day.
That was a loaded question. It was a good question, it was just loaded. But what I am recalling at the moment are the conversations he's had about the vices he took on to kind of deal with the stresses and the pressures that he was experiencing. And so how a lot of actions and behaviors are not necessarily to keep up a facade, but to deal with this position of leadership, dealing with the fact that you recognize you have privileges because of your sex, your gender, but then at the same time, you don't necessarily want to follow along in the path of what has been normalized as to how black men act, black men think, black men respond. This isn't the relationship I want to have with a woman. This is the type of relationship I want to have with a woman that deviates from this social norm. So now I'm having contrast and conflicts with this particular group. Like, I think he displayed all of that, but primarily through his use of vices and then through depression and coping. And a lot of that became like visual imaging for a lot of the videos he dropped around the same time as he dropped Humble and some of the songs that really took place on To Pimp a Butterfly. So I think he spoke to those things, maybe not in those particular words, but I think he addressed it. Yeah, he made it very, very known. It was a very transparent, and that's why I took his lyrics as true personal accounts, true personal expressions, because I felt that the stories he told, the narratives he shared, were so personal and so relatable that it would be an injustice to look at it as anything other than an actual account or a testimonial of, not necessarily how I made it over per se, but how I'm getting through. Yes, ma'am.
So you have all this data, and you have this data that says that these things are present in its emergency things. So was that your goal, or are you hoping to like move into like analysis, like this is what it means, or this is what people should do with it?
I wanted to present what it is, so that the excuse for not doing anything with it was we didn't know about it. So I wanted to be sure that, okay, what I'm experiencing and knowing from my personal experiences, what I'm having conversations with my colleagues about, when I'm witnessing my brother, enact and live as he develops and creates his own black masculine identity. All of these facets are real life facets. Let's see if it's true here. And seeing that it was true here, and now bringing this presentation here, it goes, okay, now you can't deny its existence. So what are you going to do with the evidences that you've been given? So rather than have a call to action for every religious leader or every person that claims to be attributed to the Christian faith, or every person that says that they perhaps have a heart for dealing with minority issues and people of color and men of color, it's like, well, you have a tool to use. Whether or not you use it is going to be on you. But I believe that this is an applicable tool that can reach masses.
Say one last question.
Yes, ma'am.
Like on most of the abundance of urban lives that we have today, what did you specifically to Kendrick Lamar, and also like now we've changed the trajectory of what black masculinity is over the years, and we've also added outliners of white supremacy and all of these triggering factors that kind of deters from probably what liberation theology is. So how did that affect your study personally?
So my study incorporated and actually looked at the historical making of what we now assess as black masculine identity. It talked about a Eurocentric worldview versus an Afrocentric worldview. So all of those factors were considered prior to, concluding and conducting the study. But your question, what was the first part of your question?
Oh, why did you choose Kendrick?
Why did I choose Kendrick? It was kismet. It was that perfect alignment of a moment for me. I was at this particular place with my research and my study. It was time to take it to the next level. I knew I was going to do a textual analysis on music. And here he comes, busting through the door. And then not only does he bust through the door with one album and another album, he had this entire body of data to use that stemmed back from 2006. So it was just really that perfect alignment moment for me at the time.
Can we give Dr. Crutchfield a round of applause?